On Facebook Live with Joseph Realty Group. I am Tiffany Joseph, the broker of Joseph Realty Group. And tonight we have Nerlande Joseph with Legal Services of Miami, who's a lawyer with Legal Services of Miami. And we're going to talk a very important topic. With COVID-19, there have been a lot of people who were impacted by loss of employment, and by loss of employment impacted their ability to pay their rent. And so many tenants are in a situation where they're stuck in figuring out what is happening. I'm not working. I can't pay my rent. Is my landlord, what can my landlord do? What rights does my landlord have in getting me out, or how can I pay my rent? So I want to welcome Nerlande Joseph from Legal Services of Miami. Thank you, Nerlande, for joining us.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. It's Nerlande Joseph. I'm also with Legal Services. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I currently do landlord-tenant law at Legal Services as well as family law. So those are the two areas that I am versed in.
Awesome. And then as always, I have my co-host with me, who's Chelsea, who's also an agent with Joseph Realty Group. So the two of us tonight just want to kind of kick off with you and ask you, I guess the first thing is kind of doing an educational and helping us understand is what is the CARES Act, and then also what is an eviction moratorium?
So the CARES Act is a federal act. It went into effect sometime in March, I believe. So it basically gives borrowers temporary protections regarding foreclosures, as well as for homeowners forbearance, and then also has various kind of other things. But the main things in related to tenants, it also allows, it doesn't allow landlords to basically evict folks. So that's kind of the overall nuance of the CARES Act.
And so when did the CARES Act actually come into place?
Probably around the time that we went into lockdown quarantine. So the beginning of March. A lot of the different protections, it depends on what portion of the acts you're dealing with. But some of the protections, at least specifically in terms of tenants, are in effect until the end of July.
And now, so is there a possibility that that could be extended?
I think we've been hearing a lot of talks on the news about potentially some type of additional relief. I know a lot of folks are looking for stimulus payments or checks in terms of that. I think we're kind of waiting to see what our Congress folks do moving forward. In terms of relief, definitely need renters relief, homeowners. We see our economy is taking a few hits.
And so the CARES Act is on a national level, but then our governor also implemented something, if I'm not mistaken, is called an eviction moratorium. So how does that relate to specifically to the state of Florida?
Okay, so the governor, DeSantis, he entered an executive order that was recently extended until August 1st. As it relates to tenants, the eviction, there's an eviction moratorium. A moratorium simply places like a pause, a stop. And so basically landlords cannot evict folks under the moratorium until August 1st. I think a lot of folks probably have heard on the news or people say, that, oh, I don't have to pay rent. No, rent is still due. You still have to pay rent to your landlord. What it may do is may give you some more time to either work with your landlord or come up with the money, right? Because during quarantine, a lot of businesses were closed, so folks weren't able to get a paycheck. But if you're in that situation, working with your landlord and or trying to figure out a way to pay your rent is a possibility. So under the Florida moratorium, a landlord cannot evict you for non-payment of rent. A landlord may be able to evict you for other for-cause reasons, so other issues, but if you cannot pay your rent specifically, your landlord cannot bring an eviction until after the moratorium is lifted.
Okay, very interesting. So, you know, you brought up that working out something with your landlord, like being in communication with them if you are, you know, behind on rent. So what are some options for renters right now to help with relief in maybe being able to catch up on past rent that's due or even on current rent?
It will depend. Miami is such a vast county. It will probably depend on what kind of city you're in specifically, because certain cities have rental relief programs. I know that North Miami just recently opened up one. I think Miami-Dade will be releasing one soon. So just something to look up at miamidade.gov. I want to say maybe mid-July, maybe the 14th, around the 13th. I don't think it will be open that many days. So it's something that once it goes live, you want to make sure you get an application as soon as possible, because there's going to be a lot of folks applying. There's the HANDS program. They also help with, security deposits. They help with being able to help pay your rent. They do have certain requirements, so you're going to want to reach out and see if you meet their requirements. So it's kind of looking out to your local cities and seeing what's available there. And then, like you said, working out a payment plan with your landlord. Lots of folks may be scared to reach out to their landlord, right? They're apprehensive, but that might be one of the first few things that you'd want to do, is see if your landlord would be willing to work with you, maybe work out a payment plan. Kind of letting your landlord know what's your situation if you have that kind of relationship with your landlord.
And Nerlande, so have you had people come to you and say, hey, listen, I'm back working now, but I don't know how I'm going to get caught up on the previous months, and maybe they have reached out to their landlord, and maybe the landlord and the tenant have agreed verbally. Like, do you recommend that they get something in writing, and what are the your suggestions and advice as far as that is concerned?
I think getting things in writing is always helpful to kind of make sure you guys cement that conversation, right? Because what you would hate is that something else happens again, and then you don't have it in writing. It becomes a he said, she said kind of situation for you and your landlord based on what the conversation was. So getting in writing definitely is helpful. Maybe having witnesses and other folks who are around, because for both parties, it's kind of keeping in mind that just because you're trying to work out with your landlord doesn't mean that it may end amicably, right? We're in a time where evictions probably will be rampant once these moratoriums are lifted, and folks kind of need to also be mindful of that future possibility.
So I know you spoke a little bit about like landlords. What are some of the things, is there anything out there for landlords, any type of relief? And I guess when I say landlords, those that are homeowners.
So renters and homeowners don't necessarily have the same rights, because there's different things that apply to them. The CARES Act also does have various things that apply to homeowners, and then it will depend on if they what type of property, right? Whether the CARES Act applies to you is going to depend on the kind of property that you have, specifically as a tenant, right? So if you are in a low-income housing, federally backed, those HUD housing, the CARES Act would apply. In terms of homeowners, it's going to depend on whether you have a federally backed mortgage. So we're going to see the Fannie Mae's, the Freddie Mac, the USDA's, the VA's. And so you're going to want to reach out to those individually, depending on your mortgage servicer. But there may be a forbearance. There currently is a forbearance in place for homeowners who have those type of mortgages. And then I know that Freddie Mae, Fannie Mac, they have also extended their foreclosure moratorium into August 31st. So right in between now and August 31st, if you have those type of lenders, they're not allowed to bring an eviction against you. So you're going to kind of want to reach out and see what type of protections are available to you via your federally backed mortgage if you have one.
And so you were mentioning something as far as tenants being able to find out what type of mortgage is backed by like the property that they live in. How would they go about finding that out to understand if their property does fall under the CARES Act?
Okay. In regards to tenants, it's going to be important, right? Because whether your landlord can bring an eviction against you, at least under the federal CARES Act, you're going to want to know what type of, if your landlord has a federally backed mortgage, or if you're covered under, like whether your housing is HUD or whether it applies under those categories. A website that you can go on is florida.evictionprotection.org. Right? You'll put in your address. It'll tell you whether you're backed under the federal CARES Act or whether that, maybe your homeowner has a federally backed mortgage. But that isn't the only website, because it may not just be listed, right? Because people get second loans, people sell off. So it just might depend. You can search records to see if there's a mortgage document and see if there's a mortgage document tied to the property that's FHA or anything like that. So just know that even though you look on that website, that may not be the end all be all. Landlords also will be required to file with the court if they try to bring an eviction against a tenant. They must file an affidavit that declares that they're not covered under the Federal CARES Act. So that's also something that if your landlord is bringing an eviction, they at any time that they have to have that information listed in the documents at some point during the case. And also just be aware that even though your landlord has that declaration, they may still be covered. Like, right, some landlords may not know who their mortgage provider is. So I think this is a time for folks to kind of get educated on where they stand and what kind of tenancy they may be under, at least what's covered for them property-wise.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what would be some just kind of tips if someone is, behind and, outside of going to seek, these different types of relief programs? What are some of the things, like maybe even you tell your clients, like first steps they should take if someone were to come to you and say, hey, I'm behind, I'm not working due to COVID. I don't know if I should avoid my landlord or reach out to my landlord. What kind of advice would you give them?
Because the Florida moratorium, the executive order, that has to be COVID. It states that has to be COVID related. So they may just want to kind of get documentation showing that they're not working related to COVID. If they're not working related to COVID, they may want to send their landlord a letter stating something to that effect, right? There's a website that's norent.org that they can go on, and it will outline a letter for them. They just put in the address, and the website sends a letter directly to the landlord for them.
Oh.
So that's something that they can kind of set themselves up in a way to let the landlord know what their situation is.
Oh, that's really good. So I think what you're really saying is to have some open dialogue with your landlord, and just kind of be upfront about your situation. And that probably helps both parties, I'm assuming.
Yes, very true. They could also reach out to our office, legal services, to kind of get some information, and then we kind of do an assessment as to whether they follow and there's something that we would handle. And if not, base minimum, we'd probably be able to give them advice about what potential next steps. Because certain people have unique circumstances, right? Just because you owe rent doesn't mean there aren't any mitigating circumstances in your particular case, right? You may owe rent, but then your landlord has had the roof leaking for 2 months, right? You may not have utilities on. Maybe your landlord shut them off on you because you haven't paid your rent. So there's a lot of different things that landlords may be doing against tenants that may not be legally appropriate, and that tenants may want more information about.
And so what type of, so when they do come to you in those type of situations, are you guys providing them legal services, like being their legal representative on their behalf if they do need to go to court or are in some type of litigation with their landlord?
Depending on the type of case, we definitely can. And if we aren't able to help the situation, we may provide advice or pro bono the case out. So basically, that would just mean that we'd find an attorney who'd be willing to take the case for free and assist them. So it kind of depends on the status of the case and the facts of the case. I do want tenants to kind of be aware that in terms of their landlord, a landlord isn't allowed to just kick you out without a judge, right? The only person who can evict you from your home is the judge, right? But they have to go through a legal avenue. Your landlord has to give you 3 days notice and then file that appropriately. So turning off the lights, turning off your utilities, trying to evict you by maybe changing the locks without giving you the key. Maybe you went out for the weekend, you came back and your locks have been changed. Those are called prohibited practices, and a landlord cannot do that. And you can sue your landlord for prohibited practice up to 3 times the rent. So, right, whether you owe rent or not, whether it doesn't matter where you are in your state, you could have even moved out and you can still bring a cause of prohibited practices if your landlord did something to that effect.
And so there might be some homeowners who have rented out their properties and their tenant hasn't been in communication with them and they feel frustrated now. So how can a homeowner who is now using their home as an investment property know what they can do if they haven't had that dialogue with their tenant?
Well, they are the tenants. So I think, right, reaching out, if most landlords have contact information for their tenant. If you don't know what's going on, reaching out to find out a specific, maybe being amendable to knowing that, you may have to work out a payment plan, right? Across the country, how many millions of people are out of work. So I think we're kind of in this struggle together. Landlords may be concerned that they can't pay their rent, but then also being aware that we're in a global pandemic and almost every reach of the world is being affected by this. And so what are ways that we can work together, right? A lot of tenants don't necessarily want to try to get over on their landlord. If they're able to pay rent, they're willing to do so, but it's just the circumstances we're in. So trying to find that semblance of a relationship to make sure that all parties can kind of get their needs met in this moment.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead, Chelsea, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think, in this day and age, people are like texting, and between the landlords will usually and tenants are texting. What advice do you give for both landlords and tenants and how they should be communicating with one another just to kind of protect both parties?
I guess don't say anything you wouldn't want to show up in court of law, right? Be mindful of things you say, not to harass your tenants, not to be belligerent with your landlord, right? Those are the kind of things that kind of break down relationships if you're trying to really amicably work that out. And it doesn't look good for a landlord to consistently be harassing the tenant, right? If that isn't working, then trying to find other avenues to kind of get the message across might be helpful, as opposed to like 20 text messages back to back asking where's my money, right? That clearly hasn't worked the first 19 times. So trying to figure out what ways you can, work together.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, in the future, maybe like in the next year or two, do you think that there will be changes to contracts and leases that say, in the case of a pandemic, these will be the terms and these will be the rules and the regulations if for some reason you can't pay your rent?
I actually would not be surprised if that was something that did happen moving forward. Already part of business contracts, commercial properties, construction, we see something called force majeure clause. And that basically means like an act of God. Like if a hurricane happens and I can't complete the construction job, there usually is a clause for that. I'm not sure if that's something we'll see in leases, right? Because we currently don't see that. This is a very unique situation that we're kind of in. So it could be potentially something that happens in the future. And because a lease is a contract, whether it's like boilerplate language, I would also still be something that you discuss and, negotiate and make sure you understand what those terms means with your landlord and not just sign it because you want to get into the unit, right? Realize what you're signing on to and what the implications of that language would be long term.
Right.
Yeah. And I think like that's one of the important things of, as a realtor, many people don't think of realtors helping out with rentals, but we do. And I think that's one of the good things is that realtors are experienced in contracts, whether it's looking at contracts for people who are buying or selling properties, as well as those with rental lease agreements. So if you're working with a realtor to get into something, they can help you kind of understand the legalities of that contract. And I think you even mentioned, Nerlande, like in Miami-Dade, most people aren't even on a 12-month lease. Most people are in month-to-month contracts. And I think that also has different legal implications than a 12-month. And so tenants need to make sure they're educated on what they're getting themselves into and knowing their rights.
I agree. I generally advise folks to get a lease, right? Some folks may not want to get a lease because they don't want to be locked in for so long, but at least gives you protections that just paying your landlord month to month doesn't, right? If you have a lease, your landlord has to go through certain steps specifically, and they have to be able to explain why they are kicking you out prior to the lease term ending, right? If you're a month to month tenant, generally a landlord just has to give you 30 days to be out. That is something that might be arguable in terms of now with the moratorium where they can just evict you. So that might be something, if you're in that kind of situation, you reach out to an attorney to kind of get clarification on what your options are if you're a month-to-month tenant, but being aware that a lease just has more protections for you than just being a month-to-month tenant. But that's very common in Miami. People move, rent goes up, and folks feel sometimes a lot more comfortable just being a month-to-month tenant, knowing they can just break the lease when they want to. And it's important to kind of on the flip end, there might be folks looking to break their lease. Maybe you are current on rent. You need to go. That's something that I would say, if you have a lease, make sure you understand the lease terms. If there's any termination fee that you may have to pay, some of them will let you get out of the lease by paying a fee. Some of them say you have to give the landlord a certain amount of notice before doing that. Some of them say if you break your lease, you have to the landlord gets liquidated damages and can sue you. Whether your landlord will actually go through the process of suing you is another thing, but at least just being aware of what your rights are under your lease is really important.
Right. And I think that's a good point too, because now maybe the income that they may be seeing, the tenant may have been bringing in at the beginning of when they first signed the lease may change now. Like even with people who are, you know, bartenders or waitresses and things like that, with places being at limited capacity, it might be time for them to say, okay, well, I have to pay this anymore. I need to now look at another option or something cheaper.
Yeah, especially in Miami, where more than 30% of our paychecks generally go to rent, right? So that's a huge amount. So that's definitely something to kind of be aware of. And something you said kind of made me want to just kind of also bring up security deposits, right?
Yes, I was.
Yeah, security deposits are extremely important, right? People pay a certain amount. Miami, we're expected to pay, like generally a lot of folks ask for first, last, and security, which is a huge chunk of change to be dropping in someone's lap. And so on this end, a lot of folks are like, oh, my landlord said they're just taking the security deposit. Your landlord can't just take the security deposit. What you guys can do together is maybe negotiate your security deposit in terms of maybe you owe rent and you want your landlord to take that security deposit to pay for the rent, but that has to be something that's discussed. Your landlord can't just take it because they want to, right? There is a procedure that once you leave, your landlord then has to address the security deposit. So your landlord has to hold on your security deposit until you leave, and then they have to address it. They have usually 15 to 30 days to get the security deposit to you, 15 days if they're going to return it right after. So it should be a quick turnaround from when you leave. And they also have to get it in writing as to if they are taking anything. And if they are taking anything out of your security deposit, then you also can dispute why, right? Dispute to them why they're taking it. Doesn't mean that they won't eventually get it, because maybe it's for painting. Maybe you put a hole in the wall and it's warranted that they actually take a portion out. But you are allowed to dispute, and your landlord has to go through the proper avenues to if they're going to use the security deposit outside of returning it to you at the end, or for anything that's not reasonable.
So what is the process of a tenant disputing that?
So our office actually helps with those kind of things. So if folks have any security deposit issues, so they've moved out of the lap, they can definitely reach out to our office. And then in terms of security deposit, the landlord should get it in writing. If they don't give you in writing as to why they're taking it, then that's kind of a big hurdle to kind of get over. And if they don't do that, then you will have, options before you. And then you can also dispute once you actually get that letter as to what they're taking. Basically just reaching out to your landlord and disputing it that way. Or you can reach out to our office, like I said, and get our assistance.
So just like, the question might come up because when people think of, a lawyer and legal services, are all of your services free for tenants, or do they have to pay for some of the services?
All our services are free. We help in a variety of issues, mortgages, foreclosure issues, maybe educational issues. Our website, legalservices.org, has a list of, and you can kind of see what resources. We also have a COVID-19 tab where you can get resources. So if you are interested or you think you may need help with some legal issues, you can call our number at 305-576-0080 to request or try to get an intake with our office. Or you can also go to our website, legalservices.org. There's a tab that's Get Help. You would click on that and you could do an online intake and someone would get back to you. But our services are completely free and we help with a variety of issues. One issue that might be helpful that's not related to, tenancy, but may help you get your rent is unemployment, right? A lot of folks have had unemployment issues. Oh. So if you've been denied unemployment, you could definitely reach out to, or applied and then denied, you can reach out to our office to see if we'd be able to assist you with that issue. So I say that because if you got into unemployment, maybe you can get your landlord the rent money that is due, right?
Yeah, no, that's you guys are a one-stop shop for a lot of resources. So that's very helpful. Now, do you have to live in Miami-Dade to utilize the resources?
Yes. And then we help a little bit in Monroe County regarding specific issues. Like I do some family law in Monroe County, but that's a more limited scope. But you do have to live in Miami-Dade County in terms of utilizing our services. So you can't be in Broward or West Palm or anything like that.
Do you know of any other affiliations or similar organizations as the one that you're with that are available in those other 2 counties, in Broward or West Palm?
Broward has a legal aid, legal services type of setup as well. So you would just go online and find their information and be able to see if they are also assisting in this area.
Okay. Okay. Well, you were a wealth of knowledge, Nerlande, and we appreciate. Chelsea, do you have any other questions for her?
I don't, but I'm sure that people watching now or those who will be watching the recorded version of this might have some additional questions. So where can they go to, get more information either from you or from the organization that you're with?
So like I said, the website legalservices.org. The phone number is 305-576-0080. And I think that my contact information should also be listed on the website where they can reach out to me and email me if they have any follow-ups. The name is Nerlande Joseph, Nerlande Joseph.
Well, thank you. And I really want to thank you because at our agency this month, we really focusing on renters and renters awareness. I think that a lot of times people who are renting get kind of overlooked. And so we're using this month to educate people that if they are renting, how they can rent smart. And so actually on July 25th, I'm going to be holding a webinar, a Rent Smart webinar to help people, whether you're new to renting or you are an experienced renter and you maybe want to reevaluate your situation that you're in so that you can set yourself up maybe to have a future goal of home ownership. So on my Facebook page, Joseph Realty Group, there is, if you go to events, you can actually go and register for that event. It's going to be on July 25th at 11 a.m.
Okay. Great. Oh, I just thought about one more resources. There currently is a housing participatory defense. And so basically it's a group that meets every Wednesday to allow folks to kind of go on and kind of find a community that may be dealing with some of their same issues in terms of being evicted or dealing with difficult landlords and trying to see what their options are. I think a lot of folks probably in this time probably feel really isolated. And I think quarantine makes it even worse, right? The fact that we are stuck in our homes, to feel isolated and feel like you're the only one going through that situation, but you can go to and find more information about them and kind of join the call if you'd like.
Yeah, that's very informative. And thank you again for sharing that information. So everyone who's tuned in now, or if you're watching the recording, again, I want to thank you for tuning in to another Facebook Live by Joseph Realty Group. And stay tuned for next month in August for another topic that is really just here to educate the community so that you can learn, you can grow, and you can share with your family and friends.